My name is Victor Fuhrman. Some call me the Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me now and we will explore these topics and so much more with fascinating guests, authors, and experts who will guide us to Destination Unlimited. How have women contributed to the U.S. space program, and how are they treated by their male colleagues? My guest this week on Destination Unlimited, Lori Garver, is a former NASA deputy administrator. She was one of a handful of revolutionaries that managed to outmaneuver the system of political patronage, bureaucracy, and male domination that threatened the space agency and the future of human spaceflight. From inside NASA, Garver drove changes to policies and programs that enabled competition, challenging the expensive and ineffectual traditional systems at the exact time the capabilities and resources of the private sector began to mature. Her website is lorigarver.com, and she joins me this week to share her experiences and book, Escaping Gravity, My Quest to Transform NASA and Launch a New Space Age. Please join me in welcoming to Destination Unlimited, Lori Garver. Welcome, Lori.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you so much for joining us and sharing this important message that you have. So, Lori, please share with us your path before becoming a deputy administrator for NASA.
Well, I grew up in the Midwest. I was raised in Michigan. I went to college in Colorado, pursued a degree in political science and economics. That was largely probably based on the fact that my family and my grandfather and uncle had been locally elected political leaders in the state legislature and state senate, and my father had been a stockbroker. I wanted to make a difference in people's lives in a positive way, and with that kind of degree, looked to go to Washington, D.C. to start my career. This was 1983, and we were in a recession. Certainly, Michigan had been hard hit, and so there wasn't really going to be a lot of opportunities if I returned home. I had never been to Washington, D.C. However, my father gave me 2 months to get a job where I could pay my rent. And that's what I did. My first job was working for John Glenn on his presidential campaign. And through that is how I really was introduced for at least my professional future to space and the aerospace industry. I applied for and got a job at an organization called the National Space Society. It was an advocacy, nonprofit educational group. And it was there that I started to really dig in on the topic and got a master's degree at night in science and technology policy.
Wonderful. Now, did you have any political aspirations, as you had mentioned about your family?
I don't ever really recall wanting to run for office myself. My uncle did run for Congress twice, the U.S. Congress, and I worked as a volunteer on both his campaigns. And I did have an interest in working on Capitol Hill, maybe as a staffer. I'd applied to be a legislative assistant. And had actually been hired, but the clearance didn't come through in time. And like I said, I had to pay my rent. So I took the job at the National Space Society instead.
And did you consider the ramifications of politics in the process of working with your family on campaigns?
The ramifications of politics, what do you mean by that?
I think what we're talking about is what people in political positions, not necessarily your family, but people in political positions do and how they take advantage of it.
That's a perspective that we certainly didn't have as I grew up in the 60s and 70s in mid-Michigan. Local politicians, they literally did this to help their neighboring farmers. And so it was an aspirational goal for me. And while I recognize we've come a ways from that now, that would have never entered my consciousness at the time.
Now, please share with us how you came to NASA.
So I was at the National Space Society for 13 years, although I started there in an entry-level position. I was promoted over time and became executive director. Serving as executive director was a fairly visible position in Washington. I was testifying on Capitol Hill, on the topics related to NASA and its budget and policies. I was a volunteer president of a new organization called Women in Aerospace. And through this, as getting my master's at night, I met the head of NASA at the time, Dan Goldin, who served for over 10 years as NASA administrator, was appointed by the first Bush administration, stayed throughout the Clinton, reappointed by Clinton, and through the first year of the second Bush administration, called me up one day and asked me to join his team. I had previously been serving on his NASA Advisory Council, and I think he just felt that my efforts were unique, and he asked me to come be a strategic advisor at NASA. I stayed there 5 years. This was from 1996 to 2001, and during that time I became the associate administrator, which is what NASA calls its director, of policy and plans. I left in 2001 because that position was a political position, which only about 20 of NASA's 18,000 employees are politically appointed, but you can see why the policy director would be one of them. That's how I got to NASA the first time.
And what were your goals and aspirations when you were invited to come to NASA?
The first time I went to NASA was probably, similar to anyone. I did want to advance what in government I saw as, the unique nature of our investment in space, which is it advances our economy. It gives us new knowledge about the universe and our Earth at home, and keeps us in a leadership position internationally. Those have been sort of the three main reasons we have a space program. And by then I studied it for graduate school, been working for 13 years in the business, and I was very much aligned with the administrator's views on that. So I was going there to help support the administrator and try to reach those goals on behalf of the American people.
In your book, Escaping Gravity, My Quest to Transform NASA and Launch a New Space Age, you share that you and your female colleagues were regularly objectified and that you experienced both sexual harassment and abuse firsthand. Are you comfortable telling us about what happened?
Well, I write about it in the book, this really wasn't something that, as I say in the book, this was across the community, not NASA per se. My experience as an early career female in the 1980s was not dissimilar from any of us. In fact, still goes on today. The subjugation and objectification of women is so embedded in our society, our culture, our music, it's impossible to separate that out. I would say it was worse at the time, and of course, because I was in an industry that was predominantly male. The worst personal situation for me was a time when I was traveling in Russia as a NASA employee, and one of the contractor employees who we had all been out at the bar followed me back to my room, pushed his way into my room and onto the bed. I was able to get away quite quickly, running into the hall and knocking on the door of a fellow colleague who helped me get rid of this man. That's, as I say in the book, unfortunately not something I reported at the time to NASA or to this man's, leadership chain himself. I think many of us at the time were much too accepting of that kind of behavior.
Before the Me Too movement.
Yes, I mean, that's the most current version of it, but yes.
And was this something that proliferated all of government at the time?
Oh, again, I would not even say government is the problem. This individual was not working for the government. It is societal.
Even though we had all the movements of the 60s and 70s, this was still going on.
Well, of course, this is well documented.
Now, you share that later, as a senior leader, you were vilified and your views were attacked and demeaned with foul, gendered language and disdain. What were some of the things said to you, and how did you respond?
Well, the typical gendered based attacks were just obvious because they would use, my pronouns, question, are you having your period? Much of this was anonymous, either in email or social media. There were messages sent to the Hill asking for me to be removed, saying my ideas were harebrained schemes and so forth. Again, not things that are attributed to men, and especially in the context of what I was proposing. Not only had been proposed by the NASA administrator, who, as I said, was there for 10 years, they were certainly not harebrained. These were well-founded views and have now since been widely accepted and credited with really saving our human spaceflight program. So, sure, I was called a lot of names that are bad. And I think most of the people doing that just wanted to protect the old way of doing business.
What were some of the ideas that you brought forth, and what was your research and work behind that and developing those ideas?
Well, the primary concepts are that, the government's role is unique. NASA is part of the government, and in our society, we do not compete with our own private sector. NASA has partnered with industry ever since its beginning, but we've done that in a way that in the early days, of course, required a structure called cost plus contracting, which meant, these companies were taking on projects that we didn't actually know how to do, such as Apollo. And so we in the government protected their right to profit. Not only we would pay for any change orders and that kind of thing. It's called cost plus because they're guaranteed a certain amount of money plus anything that comes up along the way. Because NASA has cost overruns very often, those are covered through just stretching out the programs. So since Apollo, we'd only, in those 50 years, been able to carry out 2 human spaceflight programs, the space shuttle and the space station. Both were supposed to cost single-digit billions of dollars, $6 to $8 billion, cost tens of billions of dollars. And NASA was pursuing those plans again. Time and time again, we had this experience, and the only way I felt to break out of this was to partner in new ways with industry, to share the risk for those things that we knew how to do, that our industry had some capability in doing. The main one was space transportation, launching people to and from space, launching satellites and spacecraft to space had been things we've been doing for over 50 years. So transitioning to a competition where we would partner with industry but not own and operate the systems ourselves was the formative idea that I advanced, which at the time people tried to say was radical. Again, it was not radical. It is seen now as absolutely fundamental to our progress. But for a lot of reasons, mainly because people were making so much money by not having these open competitions, they fought that progress.
And as someone who has worked in both government and industry, I've worked both sides, and I recognize the difference for our listeners who are not familiar with that. Industry is out to make a profit, Government is not. I think that's really the foundation of what we're talking about here. Your attempts to diversify the astronaut corps were undermined and dismissed as politically correct by NASA's male leaders. How did you answer them?
Well, some of the pushback, I really only found out the extent of it while researching the book, because I came across what they refer to as a oral history at the Johnson Space Flight Center, formerly the Manned Space Flight Center in Houston, Texas, where there were complaints that I was asking questions about, how we could make our astronaut missions and our new astronaut classes more diverse. I was the second female administrator of NASA. We had the administrator was African American, and we just continued to have astronaut classes that were predominantly white male. And the reaction, very typical to any such advocacy today, was, we really need to focus on having the best people. Like somehow that was antigonal to having our cadre of astronauts be more representative of the public.
We're familiar with the term the military industrial complex. You talk about the space industrial complex. What was the motivation of most of these men who are running the space industrial complex?
It is basically the same thing as the military industrial complex. It's a subset. I mean, most of the military industrial complex who's making things like tanks and so forth aren't involved in aerospace. But there is a lot of overlap. And as you stated, their goal is, like any corporation, to make a profit. And that is our system. It is up to the government to manage that system in a way that incentivizes best behavior and effective and efficient government spending of our money, whether that's through contracting for services or capabilities. They're really no different.
Let's look at the lack of diversity in the organization. How many female leaders has NASA had in its 64-year history?
Well, leaders is a broad term. We have had 15 NASA administrators, and none have been female. One has been an African American. There was an acting male African American before Charlie. Deputy administrators, there have now been 4 out of, I think, a similar number, 14 or 15. I think I was the 12th NASA deputy administrator and the second female. The NASA leadership team consists of about 20 people. When I was there, we got to a point where we maybe had 5 of those who were female. At least that many, however, were minorities. We, I thought, did a pretty good job at other types of diversity. Today, it is a more equal representation, certainly of gender. We have, I think, 4 of our 9 NASA center directors are females today.
There have been 134 shuttle missions. How many were captained by women?
There were 2 space shuttle commanders who were women, and they each commanded 2 flights. So 4 of 134.
What was it like for women in the astronaut corps?
Well, I wasn't in the astronaut corps. I think in the early days, the women who were there did keep a lid on the problems, and some have since been more outspoken about it. I know especially African American women have had challenging times to be given assignments, flight assignments. Felt there was disrespect of their work and their place in the Corps. Some of this is your sort of typical unintended bias, for sure, but there's also a bit of hazing that goes on, and you can imagine how when your assignments are based sort of on these relationships, how intimidating and stressful that would be.
Was there also tokenism?
Well, I mean, that's an interesting question. I'm sure there were, and still are, plenty of people who believe that if you're there and you're not a white male, you're a token. I think that's very challenging for all of us. I've certainly felt there were at least people insinuating that in some of my roles. Oh, you wouldn't be here if you weren't a woman. Those can be hurtful, and yet it continues.
Absolutely. My guest is Lori Garver. Her book is called Escaping Gravity: My Quest to Transform NASA and Launch a New Space Age. Lori, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you.
The book is available everywhere you buy books: Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all your indie and box bookstores. I recorded the audio version myself. It is available. I have a website, lorigarver.com, and my social media is primarily Twitter with Lori_Garver.
And we'll be back with more of Lori after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
The cutting edge of conscious radio, OMTimes Radio, IOM-FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Imagine yourself being transported to India, to the banks of the Ganga and an ashram in Rishikesh. Visualize that you are welcome to satsang with an American sannyasi who shares the wisdom of her guru. Your visualization has manifested. Join Sattvi Bhagawati Saraswati for inspiration and transformation every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio.
Look out, world, we're getting strong. The future's here and we belong. She can STEM, she can do more. Like build a rocket and watch it soar. Or clean the oceans and make the world a better place. Oh, she can STEM, so can you. Find a cure, invent something new. There's no challenge in the world that she can't face. She can STEM.
Learn more at She Can STEM. A message brought to you by the Ad Council.
More than 24 million Americans have an autoimmune disorder, and that number continues to grow. I'm Sharon Saylor, and I'm one of those 24 million. To put that number in perspective, cancer affects about 9 million and heart disease up to 22 million. That's why I've brought together top experts and those thriving regardless of their diagnosis to bring you the latest, most up-to-date information. Join me, Sharon Saylor, Friday night, 7 p.m. Eastern, for the Autoimmune Hour on Life Interrupted Radio to find out how to live your life uninterrupted.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. AscendingHearts.com.
Adopt US Kids presents What to Expect When You're Expecting. A teenager. Learning the lingo.
Today I'm going to help parents translate teen slang. Now, when a teen says something is on fleek, it's exactly like saying, that's rad. It simply means that something is awesome or cool. Another one is totes. It's exactly like saying, totally, just shorter. As in, I totes love going to the mall with Becca. Another word you might hear is jelly. Jelly is a shorter, better way to say jealous. As in, Chloe, I am like so jelly of your unicorn phone case.
You don't have to speak teen to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will think you're, rad just the same. To learn more, visit adoptuskids.org. A public service announcement brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week is Lori Garver. Her book is called Escaping Gravity, My Quest to Transform NASA and Launch a New Space Age. Lori, tell us about your efforts to reform NASA.
When I came into NASA the second time, I had been a volunteer on the campaign, first for Hillary Clinton, and then when Obama won the Democratic primary, they recruited me over to their side. My first discussion with him was about, in fact, NASA reform. And obviously, the agenda I laid out to him, as I describe in the book in detail, was accepted. As I said earlier, these were not revolutionary thoughts just of my own. Many people who had studied NASA, especially human spaceflight, had recognized this type of reform was needed. So I came in and was asked to lead the transition team for NASA if the Obama campaign were successful. And when they were, I got to work the next day. I mean, it's just a fascinating process. Those 3.5 months during the transition team are extremely busy. You're meeting with any constituency who feels they should be heard during this time, and you're teeing up options, really. You're not a decision-making body. You're teeing up options for the incoming people. I was asked to be deputy administrator after our transition team reports were submitted. So I was well aware that they were aligned with what the administration wanted to pursue. So for me, it wasn't like, oh, I've got this reform agenda I've got to go up against, the president. It was arm in arm with the president and the administration. Let's do better for NASA.
That must have been refreshing compared to your first experience.
Well, I think my first experience was also positive at NASA, so I'm not sure the reference. It was very positive, and I was ready to put in place much of what I learned during my first 5 years under Administrator Golden. When the Senator Bill Nelson, who ironically is now NASA administrator, got involved and forced the president's hand on who should be the administrator of NASA when I was already selected to be deputy, that's when it got challenging because Senator Nelson had pushed for Charlie Bolden, who was not in any way on board with the agenda for reform at NASA. He didn't see what needed to be changed at NASA, and so that really set up, I think, the controversy.
I can just hear the words someone saying, it's not rocket science, but rocket science really isn't rocket science, is it?
Right. I do have a chapter there in the book that I call It's Not Just Rocket Science. Political science plays a role, again, for the portion that is government funded. There's plenty of exciting and interesting things we do in space that is now, in privately held institutions, and there are markets for, obviously, communications, satellites, geopositioning, Earth imaging, those kinds of things. But human spaceflight still tends to be predominantly funded by the government.
Please share with us your experience and efforts with the commercialization of spaceflight.
The reforms that I was leading did cause us to partner in new ways with the private sector. And this happened to coincide with the development of a lot of new capability in the private sector, primarily led by Elon Musk and SpaceX. Elon Musk founded SpaceX in 2002, so this was after my first 5 years at NASA. And in the early days, we thought we would be making these same advances with the larger, more traditional aerospace companies. Lockheed Martin had, in fact, won the contract to follow on the space shuttle with a new vehicle, but that was canceled when they ran into technical difficulties. By the time I got back to NASA in 2008, Elon Musk and SpaceX had won a big contract with the government to launch cargo to the space station. Northrop Grumman is the other provider who won that competition, and both have been doing that successfully for more than 10 years. we extended that capability to include astronaut transportation to the space station, and SpaceX and Boeing won that competition. Now, you may be wondering why we only seem to have had SpaceX launches so far. SpaceX actually was awarded significantly less money than Boeing, but has already been able to transport astronauts, I think, 5 times. And Boeing, we're just told by NASA, we're looking to have their first flights early next year.
What was it like to work with space billionaires?
The first time I met Elon Musk, he wasn't a billionaire, I don't believe, in around 2002. When I first met Jeff Bezos, he was a billionaire, but not one of the richest. I think he was around 18th richest or something. The first billionaire rocketeer I met was a guy named Robert Beal from Texas, a real estate billionaire, and then Andy Beal. And then Robert Bigelow was a billionaire who was also got his money from real estate and was trying to develop inflatable habitats in space. So Paul Allen also started a space company, and of course Richard Branson. I've met them all. I think they all bring a lot of different qualities to the table, but the number one thing being they have decided to invest some of their own resources in advancing our civilization in space, and that's been primarily positive. They're different individuals. I go into this quite a bit in the book since I know people are interested, and of course I don't agree with everything they stand for, but to the extent that they are following the laws of our nation, I think I am not a critic of their investment in space.
The personal investment is really admirable and wonderful to share, but they do have a commercial business approach to spaceflight, don't they?
You know, this is an interesting topic because I think, let's just take the two biggest, Bezos and Musk. If they were following their business interests solely, they would not have space companies. I think that's pretty clear. Now, if they want to go and have advances in space, which they clearly do, they are doing that in a way where, yes, they are leveraging their investment to fulfill government interests, so that can be partially funded by the government. I've been talking about this a lot, obviously, because of the book, and a lot of people confuse these with, the subsidies that maybe Tesla's gotten and so forth, but these are not that. If you think about the government contracts that SpaceX has won, Blue Origin hasn't won many government contracts on the NASA side yet, so all that money has primarily been Jeff's. But SpaceX has won government contracts, and by NASA's own account, saved taxpayers over $20 billion. Again, money that we would have used for contracts that would have been less efficient than what we are getting from SpaceX.
Absolutely. Getting back to the criticism of NASA, has anyone in government ever had the courage to criticize NASA's operations and male leadership?
I'm sure they have. I can't name someone.
Not publicly, but I guess behind closed doors. Right?
I'm sure they are publicly too. It's just people probably, they didn't have a platform to talk about it. Certainly in the Challenger and Columbia days, there were plenty of people who came out and had criticisms. I have gotten quite a bit of contact this last month since the book came out from people who've worked at NASA over the years and who have said to me, bravo, I tried to get this or that changed and wasn't successful. There's plenty of people who recognize we could be better. And I guess I characterize it this way because I know sometimes my criticisms can be interpreted as negative to NASA, but it's more like if you have a loved one who's an alcoholic and you don't serve them drinks. You work to help them get better. And I think in NASA's case, I care so much about them. I believe they bring so much value to the nation and the world that it's important they be at their best.
Would you ever consider returning?
Well, I certainly wouldn't rule it out, but I also note I have not conducted myself since I left in a way that makes it easy for someone to appoint me or get me confirmed. The great thing is I've been so open, transparent, direct, however you take it, that the only way I would return is if there were an administration, frankly, and a Congress who wanted to drive the changes and promote the views that I have. And then I'd be thrilled, of course.
In Greek mythology, Artemis was the sister of Apollo, and the Artemis program will mark our return to the moon. What do you think of this program?
Well, as I say in the book, I have been naming human spaceflight programs Artemis since I was in grad school, because being the sister of Apollo is such the appropriate name. This program was initiated, named in the Trump administration, but has continued in the Biden administration. As I said, it's a great name for a program. It's not exactly clear to me how it's going to work. It's supposed to take us back to the moon. In fact, Trump said it's going to land the first woman on the moon. Sometimes he said, no, we should be going directly to Mars, but it's still a lunar program. We are launching the first stage of it here this month with any luck. That program is 7 years over schedule and $23 billion over budget. So it's limping along, but it's fascinating because they have chosen SpaceX to build their lunar lander. So you've got this government owned and operated cost plus contract with a launch vehicle and a capsule. Fixed price contract for a lander. These are supposed to interface somehow. We were supposed to have done this by 2024. The current administration has acknowledged that will slip at least to 2025. But the NASA Inspector General has talked about the fact that it will have cost $196 billion by 2025 and that it will not be possible to have landed on the moon by then. So how long this continues in its current form, I think, is frankly a pretty big question for the future of NASA.
You had mentioned about former President Trump saying he would put the first woman on the moon. Why do you think he said that?
I could be snarky and say it was pandering. I have no idea, but to me, it seems just so obvious. We had 12 men walk on the moon, 12 white men. Now President Biden says the first woman and first person of color. I'm actually not as supportive of making those kind of declarative statements early. First of all, who knows when we'll get there. But most importantly, I think it's 100% clear, no matter who is doing that there would be a more diverse astronaut crew than there was initially. Women were especially left out of the program because of constraints NASA chose to put on the program, saying they would be fighter pilots, and at that time, fighter pilots weren't allowed to be female. So, the very first class of astronauts that included minorities and females was 1978, I believe. So, of course, we would have the next lunar astronauts be women and minorities.
Now, I'm not a rocket scientist, but I have read about the amount of debris that's floating out there from previous space launches, from satellites that have died, and so on and so forth. What's your take on that?
This is an issue that needs attention. Sadly, it has needed attention for a while. When I first got involved in space and when I was in grad school, we were talking about orbital debris. Those 30 years since has only, of course, gotten worse. And I think we need both a governance strategy. We need some to assign an agency to take the lead. that can drive technologies and regulations to address this. Very much linked to space debris is the issue of, all the militarization of space. We've had, anti-satellite tests that have left huge debris clouds. There's no question that use of space for our military has grown significantly. And these are issues well beyond NASA's purview, but NASA must operate in this environment. So we all literally have skin in the game.
Absolutely. The same situation with our environment on this planet, and the long
Correct.
time it's taken for people to recognize that and embrace the change that's necessary. My guest is Lori Garver. Her book is entitled Escaping Gravity, My Quest to Transform NASA and Launch a New Space Age. We'll be back with more of Lori after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of OMTimes Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going On? My passion is sifting through information, research, and innovations from new thought teachers, speakers, and researchers pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics, and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
My pain into purpose is pretty much what I have done to start this foundation.
In August 2020, after the death of George Floyd, Bridget Floyd and other family members established the George Floyd Memorial Foundation in support of the Black community.
It's going to take more than just us as a foundation. It's going to take the community, the world, to make a change.
Fight for racial justice for the Black community. Learn how at lovehasnolabels.com. Brought to you by Love Has No Labels and the Ad Council.
Hi, we're the Goo Goo Dolls. We're fortunate that our daughters have what they need to grow and learn. But that isn't the case for nearly 13 million kids in the U.S. that struggle with hunger.
Childhood hunger is a heartbreaking reality that Feeding America is working to change. Each year, the Feeding America network of food banks rescues billions of pounds of good food that would have gone to waste and provides it to families and children in need.
You can help kids in need in your community by visiting feedingamerica.org.
Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Vox Novus, the new voice. Vox Novus, the new dimension. Vox Novus, thought and movement leaders who will share from their experience and offer tools to help us navigate our rapidly changing world. My name is Victor Fuhrman. Join me every Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio for Vox Novus, the new voice.
So I'm a cat, and I just moved in with this new human, and she's got this little toy she's always playing with, all day long. Tap, 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 bloop, bloop. She can't put it down. There it is. Oh, and get this. She even talks to it. Last week, she asked it for Chinese, and guess what? Egg rolls showed up. Like magic. Humans have cool toys.
A person is the best thing to happen to a shelter pet. Be that person. Adopt. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the ShelterPetProject.org.
We've all felt left out. And for people who move to this country, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week, Lori Garver. Her book is entitled Escaping Gravity, My Quest to Transform NASA and Launch a New Space Age. Lori, I was saddened, and I'm sure you were too, to hear of the recent passing of Nichelle Nichols, who played Lieutenant Uhura on the original Star Trek series and movies. She broke ground as one of the first African-American actresses in a network television series. But even Star Trek didn't mature in its approach to women until later in the series, did it?
It did not. I knew Nichelle quite well, and it is a loss that she has now passed away. I got to know her in the 1980s. She was a member of the board of the National Space Society. I also got to know Gene Roddenberry, who was also on that board. And together, of course, they were quite a pair. And I think Gene recognized that while he would have liked to do more to advance, I think, especially the female role on the series, it took a number of years for that to really take place. Nichelle was on the bridge of the Starship Enterprise in the first series, and for that, we are all grateful.
What has NASA done to promote racial diversity?
Well, interestingly, Nichelle has played a role in that. And NASA had, as I said earlier, its first class that even allowed women and minorities in the late 70s. And as I tell the story in the book, Nichelle, someone from NASA, reached out to Nichelle at a Star Trek convention, just an odd circumstance, tells the story about how he was really there in order to see if her legs were as striking in person as they were on the show, which of course is just more objectification of women, and a sad irony given that she ended up through this circumstance of meeting Jesko von Puttkamer, who was the NASA person, helping NASA recruit women and minorities to the astronaut corps. It was the first class that we were going to allow this, and I think NASA rightly had the foresight to know they had to get that word out there, that they were very serious about having just white males with a military background in the astronaut crew. So early on, Nichelle was one of the people who helped do that, and I think since then has maybe in some ways taken a more passive approach. We have in each class of astronauts a range of people from military backgrounds that somewhat drives the character of the class. But as I say in the book, when I first came back to NASA in the senior role in 2008, 2009, we were still having all white male astronaut crews, and our recruiting hadn't been representative of the population. As these things go, of course, role models are needed, and that is a slow process, but it is underway.
So you say the groupthink from the predominantly white male military and tech leaders who were disconnected from the true benefits that space activity has to offer is turning around?
I would say there's progress, but there's still brush to be cleared. And it isn't exactly, all white men who think a certain way and everybody else thinks differently. I think any insular group benefits from diversity in many ways of thought as well as backgrounds and so forth. We see this in nature, diversity builds strength, and as it does in teams and organizations. But diversity at NASA means we have to recognize that just because you were personally inspired by, say, Apollo and putting a couple people on the moon or building the biggest rocket of all time, that is not necessarily the thing that NASA should be continuing to do 50 years later. we addressed, we NASA, hard for me not to continue to believe that's a we, addressed what the nation said at the time was our biggest challenge. And that was what we wanted to show, that a democracy was a better way to advance society, science and technology. And by beating the Russians to the moon, we showed that. That is not our biggest challenge today. So NASA, as a tool on behalf of the nation to utilize the unique environment of the atmosphere and space to advance society, benefit our economy, is what we really should be doing. And I think it's too easy, especially in government, to keep repeating the same challenges that you've already accomplished, because that's what drew the people in the first place. That's what they're interested in doing. So groupthink is something we all need help getting out of.
Absolutely. We have people in senior management and leadership in various industries in our audience. What would you share with them about how they communicate and relate with their staff, especially with women?
I think it's an extension of the discussion we're just having about respecting and acknowledging that diverse opinions are valued. I cannot tell you how many of myself and my colleagues who are female feel dismissed and discounted in conversations. I've been the only woman on boards and so forth, and there's just something about our way of communicating that is not heard. The exact same ideas put forth by men are embraced. So actively listening, actively setting aside our biases is something we all need to do.
One of the things that I strive to do is to share with our audience the importance of young people studying a STEM curriculum, that is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and especially for young women. What would you offer to those in the process of making their educational and career choices?
Well, I too see this as an area that can benefit our society in so many ways. And 7 years ago now, started a fellowship for women and gender minorities in aerospace, offering them paid internships over the summer, executive level mentorship, and a gathering we call a summit each year, so that this cohort of supportive people can develop. It's called the Brooke Owens Fellowship. If people know any women or gender minorities in college who would like to apply, our applications will be out in September. We have since started the Patty Grace Smith Fellowship for Black collegiate students, recognizing that while the Brooke Owens Fellowship was able to recruit Black engineers and scientists at rates higher than the aerospace industry current employs them, we still weren't doing enough. And so this is in its third year of development. These are programs that, to me, have been embraced by the aerospace industry. We all recognize, I think, the value of these early career people. And the challenge is going to be, as they develop in their careers, to have them be promoted into leadership positions and to have their views be embraced as the views of people, who look and think and act like we do, are similarly embraced.
Where can listeners find the links to those programs?
BrookeOwensFellowship.org, PattyGraceSmithFellowship.org are both their websites. And I have links to them on my page.
What would you like readers to take away from Escaping Gravity, My Quest to Transform NASA and Launch a New Space Age?
My conclusion about my experience, it's a memoir about the value of what we are doing in space, and particularly government, and how I think we can do better. And I recognize and celebrate that what we most learned when we went to space, we looked back and found that we are in this together. And universally, the astronauts who've traveled to space become citizens, Earthlings with more responsibility and respect for each other and our environment. And I truly believe this is very critical to humanity's future.
And perhaps it should be called the Human Space Center.
Indeed.
My guest is Lori Garver. Her book, Escaping Gravity, My Quest to Transform NASA and Launch a New Space Age. Lori, one more time, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you.
Sure. The book is available on Amazon and all book outlets where you get your reading. I did the video recording. It's on Audible as well as other platforms. I am at lorigarver.com.
And at that website, they can also find the links to the two organizations you discussed.
They can.
Lori, thank you so much for joining us, sharing your experience and the hopeful message that you bring.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for joining us on Destination Unlimited. I'm Victor, the Voice Fuhrman. Have a wonderful week.